Much more to come. I remind you the hashtag for WordCamp Dublin is WC Dublin, and this lady will actually explain to you why it's in all capital letters.
Not all, not all.
Not all, not all, okay. Never mind. So we have Maya Benke from Germany. She's a web designer, and for some reason she ended up being passionate about accessibility. Now you're going to learn a lot about this, and you will hear about this over the years because it's getting so important. And hopefully in about 30 minutes we'll find out how we can get this done on our websites or on our clients' websites. Maya, as I said, is a web designer, but because we have no time and I'm really curious about this talk, I want to let her speak. At the end, we'll do a bit of Q&A, so please write down your questions and ask them at the very end so she can go straight through her talk. And don't forget, in the afternoon there are workshops, and in particular the Yoast workshop is limited to 50 people. So if you're interested in SEO, just go and get registered so you can attend that one, okay? We have 30 minutes and then Q&A, or 40 minutes and no Q&A. You always can get Maya to talk. You can always speak with her later on. Sorry, I've got a huge cold. And enjoy. Thank you very much, Maya.
Okay, hello, and thank you for being here for my talk. So talk is about how to start with accessibility. Maybe you have heard from, maybe you know a little bit already, maybe you're totally new in this field, and the most thing I heard, or often I think I heard from people is like, oh, accessibility is so complicated and I have no clue what's going on and you need to be an accessibility expert to do accessibility, which is not true. So today I want to have like a little overview what accessibility is, where to start, and what kind of main points there are for project managers, for designers, for developers, and for content creators. I already had a little introduction. So I'm from Berlin. I'm a web designer, and if you want to reach out on Twitter, that's my handle. I will use a lot the word ALLY, which is the short form for accessibility, and it's because the 11 letters between the A and the Y. So this is why they shorten it and call it ALLY. So don't get confused if I use this. And also you can use this as a hashtag on Twitter. So the first step is, what is accessibility? Enabling access for people with disabilities, special needs, and for assistive technology. So this is mainly accessibility. There are different kinds of disabilities. There are cognitive, physical, audio, and visual disabilities. And also there is a separation between temporary and permanently disabilities. Permanently disabilities, of course, if you like get an accident or if you're born with a disability, you kind of have this disability kind of forever. But there are also temporary disabilities, for example, breaking an arm and you maybe can't really use the keyboard with two hands. Or if you're just in a bright sunlight and you try to use your phone. Or if you're eating with one hand and you try to navigate through a website. That's also temporary disability. And every fifth person needs an accessible website to actually do things. That's 20% of the population who uses the web, which is quite a lot. And also if you improve something for a person who has an accessibility need, you also improve the user experience for a person who doesn't. So accessibility is for everyone. It's not only for a little niche, for a little target group, it's for everyone. Everyone benefits from an accessible website. Step 2 is the right mindset. And I really like this quote. For people without disabilities, technology makes things easier. For people with disabilities, technology makes things possible. For example, for a blind person, it's so much easier to get in the web and make some research and get information instead of going to a library and try to read a book. So the web is usually the first point for people with a disability to go to get information, to make research, to contact, to communicate just as everyone else, but even more. And that's why it's really important to make accessible websites, because the technology is there. We just have to do our job in a good way that people actually can use it. So why accessibility matters? It makes it usable for people with a handicap, and it doesn't exclude people. It improves the user experience for everyone, not only for person with a disability need or with an accessibility need. It is legal required for the most public websites, like in the most countries, and for some countries also for the private sector. It is the right thing to do. It also improves the code quality and makes your website way more robust. And it also improves the SEO, because Google is the biggest blind user in the internet. So if you care about SEO, you also care about accessibility. There are technologies for accessibility users, and that's kind of a big field. There are a lot of. And I just want to give a little example and show some stuff that you maybe get a better idea how people navigate through the internet. So there are some people that navigate through keyboard only because, for example, they have motion issues or they're blind, so they're using the keyboard only. And this is, for example, a Braille keyboard. So you just attach them to the keyboard, and you can read in Braille, and also you can type in Braille. And that's usually, like, some people prefer it sometimes than just hearing everything. They also like just to read with their hands. Another thing is a stylus that you can hold in a mouth or also in a hand and navigating like this. Then there are screen readers. I just have an example of how that sounds.
Sweetie, on my way to Berlin. Visit link. Number WCEU. Week is finally there. See you this afternoon.
Okay, and that's also why it's important to capitalize some words. Like if you have WCAU and you capitalize it, it's read out like that. But if you write it in lower cases, it's Witsuoi, because it's like spoken or read out in one word. And that's why it's important that you have the letters which are read out like WC, capital. But for example, for Dublin, it's like WC capitals, and then Dublin, the D should be capital as well. So the screen reader now, it's a new word. But then the rest of Dublin should be small, so it's read out as a word. So that's kind of it sounds complicated at the beginning, but it's not that complicated actually. Then there's speech recognition software like Alexa or Siri, or also Dragon. Siri and Alexa are more for operating system, and Dragon is, for example, for dictating speech to text. And there is something really interesting, which is a switch button. For example, Stephen Hawking used to navigate the internet with this device. And it's like some people has a really, really low motion area, so they only need like one muscle to move, and they can use the switch. And I just have a little example how that looks like. So they're going from one area to the next one, and then you select the area, and then if you want to type a word, you access the keyboard, and then you choose always the areas, and you're getting from big to small. And you can see how long it needs to just type the word hi. So that's kind of important to understand that for some technologies, you really need patience to navigate through it. So the design and how things are structured has a big impact of how easy is it to use. And for example, if now could get a message in, the focus will disappear to the message. So it's kind of hard to get back to the keyboard. So that's a good example, I think, to show how important it is that the design is good and it's easy to do things. Okay. There are also accessibility settings, not only technology you can use. For example, there are browser options and extensions. For example, the reader mode in browsers. Like there's this little icon on, like this is Firefox, but also on Safari. So you can activate a reader mode. So you get rid of all the CSS, which is there on the website, and you only have the content. So also all the sidebar commercial stuff is read out. And also you can make your own settings and how you would prefer to read. Like how large is the text? Is it dark or white? And things like this. And on Firefox, they also have a speech option, so you can read out the text, which is really good for dyslexic people. Then there are browser extensions. There are tons, so I only show one. That's a browser extension for dyslexic people. So you can change the font into dyslexia, which is like the name of the specific font. And for some types of dyslexia, this is easier to read, but not for all of them. So that's more an option for the user itself. Then there are settings in the operation system itself. For example, here, I can set my computer between like the bright and the dark mode. And as you can see, this is in German. So also the language barrier is also a problem. So for me, that's easy to read, but for a non-German speaker, it's kind of hard. So also the whole layout makes it easier to understand if it's not the same language as you speak. Then you have things like Zoom, for example. That's kind of a magnifying glass you can use on a desktop to larger the text. And if you do that, you usually go from the screen, like you're going from one side to the next one. And so you're going from right to left. And this is how you read. And this is why also important that the important things are on the top right, because that's the first thing you see. And then there are way more tools, so it was just a little overview. The step 4 are accessibility rules. So just kind of basic stuff to start with when it comes to creating websites. And a really important thing is to know that, or to understand that every part of the website has to be accessible. So even if the design and the code are accessible, but the content is not, the site will not be accessible. It's the same if the design and content are accessible, but not the code. So everything has to work together. Every part has to be accessible that you get an accessible website. And there are some like general things that applies for every field, which I think the most important thing is to be empathic, like to actually willing to want to include people, and not to say, I don't want to like to do accessibility, or I don't care about that. I mean, being empathic is not like the only thing. Like even if you do a wrong thing for the right reason, it not really makes it better, but at least it's a starting point. Think about accessibility for like by design. For example, you would not create a website in 2019 which is not responsive, or which is not secure, or which is not optimized at least a little bit for SEO. And I think the same should be applied for accessibility. It should just be clear and understanding that accessibility should also be integrated from the beginning. Let the choice to the user. So don't force the user to do something because you like it that way. For example, to have an audio start for sliders, or for videos, or for audio, because that can really be distracting. And also for a person who doesn't have a disability need, it's really annoying. Like, for example, if you Google something and you open several tabs, and then there's some websites playing automatically a video on audio, and you have maybe 3 tabs open that do that. It's so hard. Like, you just want to go back and close the tabs because you don't want to get like music just like that, and you're not aware of that. But for a person with assistive technology, it's even harder to navigate there to stop it. And sometimes they even speak over the voiceover, so you don't want that. Use the best practice, especially for coding and for developing. There's a reason why it's called best practice. Like, you don't have to be an accessibility expert. You not really have to understand how a specific code works with different kind of screen readers and different kind of operation system in different kind of browsers, because there are differences. And yes, it's a heavy field, but you don't have to know all the stuff. You only have to know the best practice and just use the best practice, because there's a reason why it's called best practice. Use the correct semantic for your elements, especially for headlines, but also use the correct elements. Like, links should be links and not buttons. Because for screen readers, that's different. Like, a button is an action, and they even have more options than links. But just use the right semantic areas or elements you have. And teach yourself the basics of accessibility for your specific part of the job. Like, for example, I'm not a developer, so for me, the developing part is still kind of a tricky thing. But that's okay, because I'm a web designer, so I'm really good in accessible design. And just do that. Just, if you're a content creator, learn the basics for the content creators. If you're a developer, learn the basics for developing. You don't have to be a whole accessibility expert to do your part of the job. And I like to say, call it accessibility thinking muscle. So just train that. Like, just because you're here and you hear this talk, you kind of get to know in the field, and just continue doing that. Just go to, I've read some articles about that if it comes along. Twitter, they have a lot of tips about accessibility if you follow ally hashtags or some people. Go to talks, just try to have an open mind, have your eyes open for this kind of topic, and it becomes more natural to integrate that in your daily job. I want to have a little overview about this, so I will be in too much details because it will be otherwise a little bit too much with the time. But for project management, the accessibility points are like the most common mistakes are that the accessibility is not included from the beginning. So it's not defined in the requirements, it's not integrated in the calculation, and in the worst case, accessibility is not a point at all. In a good way, or not, like in a less worst case, it's at the end, it's like, oh, we need the accessibility in the website as well. And it's kind of like creating a house, and on the end you say, oh, we need an accessibility entrance, we need an accessible toilet and shower. So to rebuild everything, it's way more expensive instead of just doing it from the beginning. Also, accessibility is usually the first position that it's cut out if the budget is like or not high enough, and if the costs are too high, which is really sad, because if you do that from the beginning, it's not that expensive actually. Also, the mindset is often a problem, that I say, oh, it's not our target group, or it's not important for the specific project. But think about, like 20% of the population needs an accessible website, and you not really want to exclude 20% of potential customers or of people. And for example, 8% of all men are colorblind. So if you have a target group which is manly, or like target men's, you have to think about colorblindness. But also if you have a website where the only target group are females, they still have male friends and family members who maybe wants to buy a gift or something. So still, it should be colorblind friendly. And the problem is also that accessibility is not tested. So it's important to test it after every step, not only at the beginning, but at least you should test for accessibility. So the solution is accessibility by design, and integrate and understand accessibility as natural as responsive design or SEO or also security. Because if you do that from the beginning, the cost will be much less to integrate accessibility. And also you will avoid fees, because in some countries there are legal requirements that you have to have an accessible website. For example, Domino's Pizza just got a big fee in US because they were not accessible, and they refused to rebuild an accessible website. And now they have to pay, I don't know, probably 10 times more or something. And they have a really big image problem now, so don't do that. If you're an agency, try to onboard everyone, that they have at least a basic understanding of accessibility, and check accessibility after every step. And also if your clients work on a website, for example, if they put content in, teach them about accessibility as well, so the website should stay accessible. So for design, the common mistakes are the color contrast is super bad, they have really thin and small fonts, which is really hard to read, because you write content that people actually want to read it and that they read it, so don't make it harder for them just because it looks better, because it doesn't. Another problem is that the information sometimes are only transported by color only, which is a problem for people with a color blindness, or also if they have a wrong or like a bad color contrast setting on the screen. And especially that applies for underlined links, that they're not underlined, so you not really can spot them usually. So I have a little game. In this picture, there are 3 links. Can you spot them? It's hard, right? Because they're not underlined. No, they are, but not in this picture. And on the other side is a graph where they only have different kind of colors for the dots. But if you're colorblind, you can't actually use that. So it's better to add more information like symbols, that you can spot them better and that you actually can use it. Then there are more common mistakes. I just mention them, but you can, if you're interested in design, you can just go deeper in this field. There are more resources on the end. Like the focus star is missing, clickable areas are super small, which makes it really hard to navigate in, and the mindset that Ali doesn't look good, which is kind of wrong, because if you're a designer, you can make it good, you just need a little bit of effort to do that. And kind of interesting, what I see sometimes is that the design actually breaks the functionality. For example, there were a WordCamp where they printed the password access, the Wi-Fi access on the badges, and they used this beautiful font, which only contained uppercases or styles for uppercases and not for lowercase letters. But the password also contains lowercase letters, so you could not use that because you not really could guess which letter is uppercase and which letter is capital, lowercase. So that's kind of a deal breaker because the design should support the functionality and not break it. So they had to print out all their passwords again and hand it out to the attendees, and it was 600. So yeah, kind of a problem. Don't do that. So the solution is understand your design to support the user and also support the functionality and the design. Because design is not art. Like if you only want to make something pretty, that's art. But if you really design something, it's there to support the thing you're doing. It's there to make it easier to use. What I do also often when I design things is I design it in black and white first. So therefore you're sure you can use it in black and white as well. And then I add the color later. If you don't want to do that, at least test the website in black and white. There are tools where you can just have like a screen making in black and white, or you can just make a picture and fade out the contrast. No, not the contrast, but you know what I mean. Just fade out the color and then try to use it. And also be creative and find fun ways to make it accessible. Especially with the not underlined links, I hear often, but they're not pretty. Well, they are. You just maybe think a little bit about how to make it, that it works for your copyright identity. Yeah, there are, for example, those examples. I don't think they're ugly. I really like them. So you can really find like creative ways and just try out a little bit, test around what works for your specific project. Yeah, that's another some solutions. I would just have a little overview because I say underlined links a lot because that's so important. That's really a big issue. Also bad color contrast. There are a lot of checkers to test them. Also for Sketch, for example, there are plugins. Good readable fonts are really important. And also the focus. I see this a lot, especially in themes, that the focus is disabled and they say, we don't want to use that, which is really, really sad. And you can use the standard focus, which is like a blue corner, but you also can just style the focus together with a hover style, so it actually has a real style. And also testing that. For example, this is a WordPress site where you can only use it with a keyboard. Oops. So, and if you click around, you actually see where you are. But if you don't have a focus style, you have no clue where you are, which is kind of sad. And this is like a standard one, but you also can style it, that it looks like in the way you want. Okay. Integrate this also in the style guide. And what's really important as well, use some white space and a clear structure. Here are two examples. On the one side is a Smash magazine, and they used to have this layout, which is kind of confusing because you not really know where to start to read, where to continue to read, and especially, for example, if you use the magnifying glass, you're kind of lost because first you will see the author, then you will see a part of the text, and then you will see the title. Not really ideal. On the other side is like a really clear structure. There is a headline on top, there's a description, and then there's the content. And it's like way easier to understand, so you don't have to, it's just natural reading. Okay, that's a note for myself. So next point, developing. One of the biggest mistakes or largest problems I see, I experience when I test in websites, is that you can't navigate through a website sometimes with keyboard only. This especially applies for menus and pop-ups. Even now we have all the cookie notifications that kind of applies everywhere, which appears everywhere, which is also annoying. But if you can't access into the pop-up with the keyboard, you can't access the site. You can't get into the site. And also if you can't use the main menu, you can't really enter the content you want to read. That's a huge, huge, huge problem. So really make sure you can use it with a keyboard. Just tap it. Just like tap through it. If you don't have to learn VoiceOver or like a screen reader, just tap through it and just test it if you can access your website with the keyboard only. Same for accordions and other interactive elements. Also like index order are a problem, or HTML elements that are used wrong. Also, like there are sections in HTML5, like header, for example. So use those. Use HTML5. Don't do a div and then say class header, because screen reader can't really interpret that. So do the best practice. Use HTML5. Same for forms, that they are missing a label and there's only a placeholder because screen reader don't know what should I type in here. But also for people on a mobile phone, if they tap in and there's no label, they don't know, is it my name, is it my email address, what do they want? Time limits are a problem as well. If you think about a switch, to fill out a form with a switch, it's super time intense. And if you have a time limit, that's a big problem. But also for people with anxieties, or if you have to look for your credit card details, you don't want to have a time limit of 5 minutes, because that's really produces stress. And if you need actually a time limit, make sure you can expand those. So don't force the people to freak out. Target blank, it's like open always the tab in a new, a link in a new window tab. It's a big problem as well. I mean, for me, I really have a lot of tabs always open, like who else? Yeah, and that's okay, because that's how we use the web, but not everyone uses it like that. Like for screen readers, open in a new tab is a nightmare. They prefer open in a new window, because for them it's easier to get through. So just because you like it that way, which is fine, don't force other people to use the same as you like to do that, because everyone is different, so don't use target blank. Even not if you say internal links, the same tab, external link, another tab. No. Still people will leave your site one day. Make it easy for them to come back, because you disable the back button on the browser, which is the most used button in the internet, so don't do that. Another problem is also the language setting that are sometimes not really integrated. So you can say in on the website, like in the background, which language is that, and a screen reader will switch that. So you don't want to have a German voice reading out English text, because it doesn't make any sense. And if you integrated those, you can, like, it's easier to understand. Okay, I kind of said that already. Area labels, it's a fun thing. The first rule is don't use area labels. If you don't have to, use HTML elements. But if you have to, use it. And there's a really good talk from Rian, which I just linked here. So if you want to learn more about that, just go there. And also to skip to content. If you have ever used a website with a keyboard, maybe you have seen that already, which is a really nice tool. So it's in the upper corner. So you can just skip the whole menu point, especially if you have like a mega menu. It's super annoying for screen readers. So you can just say skip to content, and you're directly in the content and can start reading there. There's also in the handbook, there are tons of documentation about that, where you can learn how to do that. Yeah. Okay, here's also the part for the language setting, how to do that, also the link. There are also testing tools, like for example, Wave and X. They're browser extensions where you can use, and you can just test your website. It also applies for designers and content creators, not only for developers. So for content, I just go a little overview because I'm kind of running out of time. Common mistakes are wrong semantics and, for example, really big text blocks, which are super hard to read. And also that the headlines and the buttons and links itself, they not really have a clear meaning sometimes. Like click here, you can say as a screen reader, just read out all the links. And then you hear click here, read more, click here, read more, and you have no clue what to do. So it's better to say, see our guidelines, or see this, so they actually know where the link goes. And big problem that the alt text are missing for pictures. Like for example in Twitter as well, you can activate the setting and then you can add alt text, so it's also accessible for blind people. Yeah, there are the solutions. So this, for example, the text block, and then with some structure, that's actually the same text. I guess most of us would prefer the one with the more structure, where it's easier to reach, where the eye has some space to rest instead of the text block itself. Semantic orders you can test in Gutenberg as well. So if you use a wrong headline level, they will point out. Yeah, that's already mentioned as well. And also test your content. There's a new plugin I'm kind of upset about. Obsessed. It's Content Author Accessibility Preview, so you can just use it and it will point out some problems for the site as well. use different kind of formats because everyone prefers different things, and also every situation prefers like different formats, but also everything you do in a video or an image, also describe this as a text. So it's also accessible for a person who only reads the text and can't really access audio, for example. Integrate subtitles and captioning. Maybe you've noticed the captioning over there, which is, especially for me as a non-native English speaker, it's really helpful if there are speakers with a really heavy accent. I use this a lot, and the same applies for videos. For example, it's a blind girl who has a YouTube video that I really like, and she's subtitled all her content on YouTube. One thing I really want to mention is the auto start for sliders, movies, and audio. I already mentioned that. But also movings and flashing elements can be a big problem. Like if you want to read a text and there's a moving, like especially ads sometimes has this, they're kind of moving. For me, it's super distracting and I can't focus on a text. So actually I have to cover it. And if you have flashing elements, it can be a big problem for people with epileptic because it can cause a seizure. So make sure that your website is not a health issue for some people. There's some testing tools. I just saw that. You can check this out later as well. And I want to finish the talk with this quote, which is, the one argument for accessibility that doesn't get made nearly often enough is how extraordinarily better it makes some people's life. How many opportunities do we have to dramatically improve people's lives just by doing our job a little better? Thank you. There's some resources you can see. They're really, really good. There's tons of information about that. We can go through the questions.
Slides will be available for everyone at the end of the event.
Yeah, I will tweet that. Yeah.
Don't worry too much. She will do this.
Yeah.
So we've got about, I think, 10 minutes for Q&A, and after that, Maya will be available for the rest of the day, starting from the support room, I believe. But if not, just stop her and say, how can I get that fixed? All right, so we've got questions. 1, 2, 3. Okay, let's start with this lady.
How comprehensive are these tools for checking accessibility? You mentioned Ali, no, it wasn't Ali,
X and Wave.
Yeah. And Wave. Do they check all three aspects of accessibility or just one? Or?
That's kind of hard. So there's some. The question. I just repeat that for the live stream. The question was like, how good are the testing tools, and if they test everything? Now they can't test everything. They only can test things that are able to test. And also the problem is a little bit like accessibility by a checklist are not really existing. So there's some things you can test, but you still need kind of a person who looks over. But it's at least a starting point where you can also learn. For example, the plugin I mentioned, they point out some stuff, and then you think, okay, why is this a problem? Then you read about it, and then you decide on your own if it's necessary or if it's a problem. And they only can test things like color contrast and technical things, but not so much content. Like, for example, click here, a word like that, it's not tested.
Okay. Like, for instance, there is a content management system, Sitecore, that comes with an accessibility kind of checker, and it allows you to kind of focus on single A accessibility or double A or triple A accessibility score. Is there anything like that you're aware of in
WordPress?
So the question was if there's a testing tool like another content management system to test for specific levels for accessibility. No, not really. And also it's not possible actually because you can't test everything automatically. So if I, for example, test a website for accessibility, I use different versions. So first I check for color contrast. I use tools, but still you have to kind of look at it and see, okay, where could be potential problems, and then you check with a tool. Then I check it in black and white. Then I use a screen reader. Then I use the keyboard-only navigation. And then I use Wave and X. And then hopefully I covered at least the basics. But yeah, you can't really test everything automatically.
Thank you. Okay, we have another question.
When you write accessibility texts, for example, social media, how specific do you have to be in like the explanation of what is going on in the picture?
Okay, the question was like how how do you write accessible text for accessibility and for the image description? It kind of depends. So if you have information in a picture, like a graph, which is really important, you should add more information that, because the thing you want to transport with a picture, you should put it in the alt text, or if that is too complicated, you should have a real text about that. But then you can always link to a blog post if it's too long. For the text itself, for example, if you just tweet something, it's good, like if you remember the capitalizing thing, that you're aware of that, and also that you don't integrate too many hashtags, because that can also be a little bit annoying. Like there should be, like, focus on the important things. Yeah, that's kind of, I would say.
There was a question there, and there's another one over there. Okay, you go.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't quite. When you talked about the target blank earlier, were you saying that you should or shouldn't open in the Windows attack? Didn't quite.
Never use target blank. Never use target blank.
Is there an alternative?
Just leave it by default.
Okay.
Like the default is the same tab, but then a user can decide, do I want to have it in a new tab, new window? Just leave the choice to the user. There's just one reason I would say, okay, there I see that. It's if you fill out a form and you have information, like an explanation of something, before you leave the page, you should have a warning that you will probably lose the information you put in already. But then you can also use this without target blank, but that's kind of, okay, I get it. But usually never use target blank.
Okay, we have time for 2 more questions. There is one there.
The example you were talking about, always underline your links.
Yeah.
But one of the examples you gave, the bottom right one, had the links, the decoration appeared on hover.
Yeah.
Is that would seem like contradicting what you're saying, or is that a good one or not?
Okay, the question were that I said always underline the links, but then in the example there were menu links which were not underlined. You should always underline your links if it's contained between text. So if there's a link standalone, like in a menu, it's clear that is a link. So you can underline, but you don't have to, because you know this is a menu, I can click on that. The same like if you have the contact link in the footer, because it's only contact. So you don't have to underline that, or if you have the sidebar. But if it's inside of text, you have to underline that.
Great,
Yeah.
awesome. Last question? Yes.
Sorry, I didn't get what you said about important stuff being in the top right. Was that for the magnifier, or what was that about?
Okay, the question was, I said everything should be on the top right. And the question was if it's for the magnifying glass or for everyone. It's especially for magnifying glass users, but it's also important for everyone, because we kind of used to, because we're reading from right to left in our language, so we are kind of used to start on the right on top. So if you have a title, you would not look in the left upper corner, because it doesn't make sense to have a title there. So it's more important, like, that you have this important line like this. Yeah.
Sorry, so is that the top left?
Top
okay,
left.
Okay, just to
sorry.
Which takes us to another question, which is there are some people who will read from right to left.
Yeah.
So how can you make a website accessible?
That's
for
really
everyone?
fun. Okay, I've never used it by myself yet, but there were really interesting talk in WordCamp Paris, I think, from a guy from Israel. And it's kind of the opposite of the layout, but not everything.
Right.
Because, for example, if you have a map, it's still the right way. So you can't choose, switch everything.
So would you just center all the text?
No, no. Don't center text, because that's harder to read. It's more like, for example, in our language world, it's better to have, if you have a sidebar, to have it on the right side, because then you read and you're not really hang there. But if you have the other side reading, you should have the sidebar on the left.
Wow. Okay. So we could keep going for about 7 hours.
Yeah,
7
totally.
days or 7 weeks.
Also, the next talk here will be about captioning, which is really important for accessibility. And tomorrow there will be a contributor session about accessibility, which I lead. So if you have questions about accessibility, I'm super happy to answer even more, and I will be around. So
Thanks very much, Maya.